Hello, sixth graders. Here we go with lesson 5.3, multiplying decimals. So if you would add that to your table of contents, the lesson is 5.3, the title is multiplying decimals, and the pages will be pages 23 and 24 in your notebook. Okay, so this is how we're going to set up the page for this lesson. At the top, write 5.3 multiplying decimals, and then create 5 boxes. And the bottom box will be longer than the other 4. Okay, now for this part, you do not need to put this in your math notebook. This is not one of the boxes. I just wanted to show you this because they talk about this in the book, and it gives you a visual explanation of what we're doing when we multiply decimals. So when we multiply 0.3 times 0.5, we're multiplying 3/10 times 5/10. And so if we were to take one whole and break it up into tenths, you would have 10 of these little squares would be 1/10, because there would be 10 rows of strips going across and 10 rows going down. So looking at this example, when they have 0.3 times 0.5, what they're really saying is you're taking 3/10 of 5/10. So what I did, and what the book does, is they take this model and they show you what 5/10 would look like. And if you look at 5/10, I highlighted them in orange going across, and I labeled, and you'll see that there are 5 rows highlighted to represent 5/10. Then if you're going to take 3/10 of 5/10, then what they want you to do is they want you to shade in 3/10 of the 5/10, so only of the shaded area already, and we'll take 3/10 of that. So I'll color that in with my blue. 1, 2, 3. So 3/10 of 5/10. And so when I multiply that out, you can see that I have 1/1500ths. So if you look at all the little squares, there are 100 of them, and so I have 1/1500ths that are shaded both orange and blue, or 3/10 of 5/10. So 3/10 of 5/10 is 1/1500ths. And so when we multiply it out, that's the answer we would get. We would say 3/10 of 5/10, or 3/10 times 5/10, and that would give us 1/1500ths. Okay, and that's just showing you a visual of what you're doing when you're multiplying decimals. Okay, multiplying decimals is really easy as long as you know how to multiply. And so it really just basically breaks down into 3 steps, and we're going to put those steps in box number 1. So step A, or step number 1, would be multiply as you would with whole numbers. So just multiply like you normally would. Then after you multiply, the second step is to place the decimal point in the product or in the answer. And we're going to talk about how to do that in this lesson. And then the third step is just that the number of decimal places in the product equals the sum of the decimal places in the factors. And I'm going to show you what that means. But go ahead and write those steps down. Okay, so let's do this problem. 0.3 times 0.5, or 3/10 times 5/10, or 3/10 of 5/10. We're going to multiply it as if it didn't have a decimal. So we're going to say 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. Then I'm going to move over a space to the left, and I'm going to do 0 times 3 is 0, and 0 times 0 is 0. Then I'm going to add those. 5 plus nothing is 5. 1 plus 0 is 1. Nothing plus 0 is 0. And I'm just going to put that 0 in there for now. Now, we're going to use that third step. We're going to put the decimal in our answer. And the way we do that is we count the decimal places in the factors. So in 0.3, we have one place to the right of the decimal point. So we're going to put 1 right there. In 0.5, we also have one space to the right of the decimal. So we're going to put 1 right there. Then we're going to add those, and the sum of those two numbers is 2. And that tells us how many places to move the decimal in our answer. So in 0.3, we had one place to the right of the decimal. In 0.5, we have one place to the right of the decimal. So in our answer, we're going to have 2 places that we move the decimal, but we're going to go the opposite direction in the answer. So we're going to go left. So you put the decimal at the end, or imagine it there, and you move it 2 places, 1, 2, and it goes right there between the 0 and the 1. And so my answer becomes 0.15. And then I can check because I have one place here in 0.3 and one place here in 0.5, which gives me 2 places. And I have 2 places that I move my decimal, except this time I move them to the left. Okay? And that's how you multiply decimals. That's all there is to it. Okay, so let's do another one. 3.2 times 2.1. So I'm going to write it vertically because it's just easier for me. 3.2 times 2.1. I'm going to multiply as if it didn't have any decimals in it. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 3 is 3. Move over one space to the left and multiply 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. And I'm going to add those up. 2 plus nothing is 2. 3 plus 4 is 7. Nothing plus 6 is 6. Then I'm going to count my decimal places, and I'm going to say, okay, this factor, 3.2, has one place to the right of the decimal. 2.1, this factor has one place to the right of the decimal. So if I add those up, that gives me 2 places in my answer, or in my sum, or I mean my product, not my sum, I'm sorry, in my product. But remember, I have to go the opposite direction. So I start at the end, and then I move my decimal 2 places to the left, and that gives me my answer. So the answer is 6.72. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to check for reasonableness. In the last slide, or in the last box, we said that 3.2 times 2.1 is 6.72. We want to see that we're on the right track. So the way we can do this is by estimating my factors to get an estimate. So 3.2 rounds to 3, and 2.1 rounds to 2. And if I multiply 3 times 2, I get 6. 6 is pretty close to 6.72. My actual answer is a little bit more than 6 because I started out with a little bit more than 3 and a little bit more than 2. But my answer is reasonable, so it should be, it most likely is good. If I had put my decimal in the wrong spot, if I had said 67.2, that would be nowhere close to 6. Or if I had said 0.672, that would be nowhere close to 6. And so estimating can really help you figure out if you've put the decimal in the right spot, because that way you'll know if your answer is reasonable. Okay, in box number 5, we're going to do another multiplication of decimals problem. So we're going to say 12.6 times 5.3, and I like to set up these problems vertically because it just is easier for me. And I also like to put the number with the most digits on top because that helps me. You can do it however you want, but for me that works better. So my first step is to just multiply as I normally would. And so 3 times 6 is 18. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7. And 3 times 1 is 3. Then I'm going to switch colors just so we can keep track of where my numbers are going. And this is where it's also really important to be neat. So I'm going to move over one space to the left, and I'm going to multiply 5 times 6 is 30, so I'll put my 0 here, and put my 3 up there above the 1. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 3 is 13. So put the 3 there, and the 1 above the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Then I add those two answers together, and 8 plus nothing is 8. 7 plus 0 is 7. 3 plus 3 is 6, and nothing plus 6 is 6. Now, my answer isn't very reasonable right now because my answer is 6,678. But when we check it for reasonable, you'll see that that doesn't make sense because I have not moved my decimals yet. So I am going to go back to the first factor, and I'm going to say, okay, that has 12.6 has one space to the right of the decimal. 5.3 has one place to the right of the decimal. So I add that up, and that means I should have 2 places in my answer, but I have to go the opposite way. So I'm going to go to the left in my answer. And so I start by putting an imaginary decimal at the end, and I move 2 places over, and that gives me 66.78. And then I have to check for reasonableness, like I said. Does 66.78 make sense? Well, if I estimate or round, I say 12.6 is close to 13, and 5.3 is close to 5. So 13 times 5 gives me 65. 65 is close to 66.78. So I'm in good shape, I think. If I'd put my decimal in the wrong spot, my answer would not be close to 65. Okay, so when you're finished, this is what your notebook page should look like, something like this. And after you have checked that, then we are done and you're ready to move on. Good job.